Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. I suspect that some of you saw the press conference that Secretary Hagel gave this morning on this topic. I will try not to repeat what he said, but I will give a brief overview of the reviews that he rolled out this morning and what the Department of Defense is doing in response to them. In the wake of a series of events involving our nuclear forces and their senior leadership, early this year the Secretary of Defense directed an internal and external review of the entire Department of Defense nuclear enterprise. The objective was to assess the health of our nuclear enterprise and our ability to operate, sustain, modernize, and man our nuclear forces for the foreseeable future so that corrective actions could be taken. There were two review teams, one an internal team headed by then Assistant Secretary of Defense Madeleine Creedon and Admiral Pete Fanta, who at the time worked on the Joint Staff, is now on the Navy staff. There was an external review chaired by two former four-star officers in the United States military, General Larry Welch, who was retired Air Force, former Chief of Staff of the Air Force, and Admiral John Harvey from the U.S. Navy, retired four-star as well. At the outset, I want to make clear what these reviews were not about, so there's no confusion about that. They were not about the nuclear warheads or our nuclear weapons that are administered by the Department of Energy. The reviews were not about the United States nuclear force posture or our policy or our extended deterrence policy. None of those were the subject of these reviews. And finally, for our friends in Europe, these reviews were not about or have no impact on our NATO dual-capable aircraft mission. And for our British friends, there was no effect or review of our cooperation on our bilateral program or the Trident program. What they were about is focused on the people, the systems, the infrastructure of the Department of Defense that support our nuclear triad, that is, the sea-based systems, our bomber force, and the ICBM force. Both reviews examined the nuclear deterrent mission with respect to personnel, training, testing, command oversight, mission performance, and investment. They visited all of our operational bases, many of our support facilities in the United States and overseas. They interviewed hundreds of people up and down the chain, from officers to the lowest enlisted personnel, as well as civilians. The reviews are now complete. They've been presented to the department leadership, and as I said, I expect many of you saw the Secretary announce it at his press conference this morning. What the reviews found is that the internal review found is that while the nuclear deterrent is safe, secure, and effective today, the reports tell us we need to take action now to ensure that this remains the case in the future. The reviews gave us a roadmap for action with over 100 recommendations. Secretary Hagel has announced in response a comprehensive approach to reform the oversight of the nuclear forces, to make critical investments in sustainment and address long-standing cultural issues that have affected the morale of the nuclear force. The recommendations in the reports range from acquisition investments, such as upgrading the helicopters that the Air Force flies for security in the ICBM fields, to leadership challenges that will take time to see through, that is, improving and changing the culture involved in administration of the nuclear force. Generally, the reviews focused on several key areas, including oversight, investment, personnel, and training. In this last category, it involves literally just filling vacant slots, or billets, as the military calls them, changing the culture of micromanagement, boosting morale, and improving the manner in which training and inspections are conducted. The decline of the nuclear enterprise, according to the reviews, has occurred gradually, the result of years and in some cases decades of neglect and underfunding, which will take years to address. But the Secretary of Defense has made it clear this will be his top priority going forward. We've already begun to implement changes across the enterprise in the areas of investments, oversight, personnel, and training. The Secretary has set up an accountability mechanism within the department, which we call the Nuclear Deterrent Enterprise Review Group, Everything in the Department of Defense must have an acronym, so it is called the NDERG, which brings together the senior nuclear leadership, which will meet quarterly with the Secretary and more regularly in between these quarterly sessions with the Deputy Secretary. The Secretary has made clear he will personally hold leaders accountable to make sure that words are followed with actions and real improvements are made, and he expects the leadership of the military services to do the same. Secretary Hagel has set up an accounting mechanism using our office, which reports directly to him. It's known by the acronym of CAPE, which stands for Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation. And they are taking every recommendation and looking at how we propose to act on these recommendations, tracking the progress, coming up with measures of effectiveness, so we are not just checking a box to say, yes, we did that, but looking at whether the changes are working. They are essentially an independent office within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. They don't work for OSD policy. They don't work for the acquisitions people. They work directly for the Secretary. So they have no stake in the outcome other than getting the right answers and saving the taxpayers' money on investments we should make or don't need to make. This is going to cost money. We've already spent some money in fiscal 14 and fiscal year 15. The Air Force spent up to $300 million in those 2 fiscal years on what it calls the Force Improvement Program. And as we're putting together the budget for fiscal 16 and the coming fiscal years, we're looking at what investments we will need to make to answer the recommendations of these reports. Let me conclude by saying a couple of things. One, as the Deputy Secretary said this morning, there is nothing here that we can't fix. These are not hard challenges, to use a term from American football. It's basic blocking and tackling. It's giving people the tools they need to do the job. The military personnel that work in the nuclear forces have performed remarkably, and we just need to give them the tools to continue to sustain that level of effort. With that, I will take your questions. Oh, I meant to say, there's a lot of information on the Department of Defense website. The external review by General Welch and Admiral Harvey will be found there. You will not find the internal review because it remains classified. And there are other fact sheets that you can find on the Department website.
And with that, we'll move to your questions. Please raise your hand and wait for me to call on you. Please identify yourself and your outlet when you ask your question. And for any colleagues in New York, please step up to the podium if you have a question, and we'll call on you in turn. We can start here at the front with Hui.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm Hui with China Central Television, CCTV America. And as you said, in order to fix those questions, you will need more money. Would you please give us more details on how much money you will need, where the money will come from, and how it will be used? Also, as we know, the U.S. has already, has by far the highest military spending in the world. So now you are going to spend more money in military. So how would you ease other countries' concerns? And don't you feel that it could trigger another round of competition on military spendings around the world? Thank you.
The first thing I'd say in response is we're not changing the size or the number of deployed weapons that we have as a result of these reviews. The kinds of investments we will be making, I'll give you some examples of some things we've already done. The reviews found that in our civilian shipyards for the Navy, they didn't have enough people and they didn't have the right skill sets in the engineering and other trades. So the Navy has been authorized to hire up to 2,450 additional shipyard workers so that we can have more efficient throughput as we repair the boats that come through the shipyards. The Air Force Global Strike Command, which oversees the bomber force and the ICBM force, has been given 1,100 additional positions or billets, airmen, because they had shortfalls across the enterprise in having people do their jobs. Other infrastructure changes at a shipyard, for example, more cranes, repairing piers, really just basic infrastructure for the maintenance. Not everything we're going to do will cost money. Only about 20% of the recommendations will involve funding. Many of the others are regulatory changes, how we administer inspections of the force, the rules on who may be near a nuclear weapon. We call it the Personnel Reliability Program. A range of things involved in the administration of the nuclear forces. I cannot give you a dollar figure because we're still working through the analysis of what it will cost, and because a lot of this will inform our decisions in the President's budget for fiscal 16, which is still under development, and I hope you can understand why I can't tell you what that number will be, because those decisions have not been made by the Secretary or the President. What I can say is the amount of money over the next 5 years will be billions, not tens of billions of dollars.
Less than 10 billion?
Billions and not tens of billions. So that's the best I can give you right now.
And the second question I asked you, as I ask you, how would you ease other countries' concerns, since U.S. by far has the highest military spendings in the world?
Well, I think I tried to do that with my first part of the answer, which is we're not changing the composition or size of our nuclear force. In fact, we continue to adhere to the limits under the New START Treaty, which govern our strategic weapons and in place limits that we must get down to by 2018, and we are on track to do that.
My name is Andrei Sitov. I'm a Russian reporter with TASS, the Russian news agency here. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming over, and thanks to our hosts at the FPC, as always. I guess my question is a sort of a follow-up to that. I want to ask you a question from my wife, who's worried about the recent increase in rhetoric, including some nuclear weapons-related rhetoric around the situation around Ukraine and the current difficulties we have in our bilateral relations. You mentioned START. So my questions to you are, should we be worried? Are you worried? Has the level of readiness for the U.S. nuclear arsenal been raised? Has the nuclear posture changed in any way because of what's happening? Generally, whatever you can share on that subject, I think would be very eagerly awaited by my audience. Thank you.
With regard to the United States nuclear force posture, it has not changed. We are not on a different readiness level, so far as I'm aware. And as I said, in answer to the previous question, we are not changing the size of our deployed nuclear weapons in response to these reviews. I am paid to worry. So if you ask, am I worried? We are paid not to be complacent. But I think the good news out of these reviews is that the Secretary asked for a very honest and thorough assessment. And he got that. And as I said, there is nothing here we can't fix. The arsenal remains safe, secure, and effective today. And if we make these investments, it will remain so.
Keep moving it up to the front, Stefan.
Stefan Grober with Euronews European Television. You mentioned decades of neglect and underfunding of the nuclear enterprise. Do you have a sense of how much time it will take to implement the recommendations provided Congress will release the necessary funds, and how confident are you that Congress will do so? Thank you.
On the latter question, I could tell you the Secretary spoke to several members of Congress on the Armed Services Committees yesterday to tell them the reports were coming out today. And I and several other colleagues briefed several congressional staff yesterday, and the briefings were very well received. That doesn't tell us we'll get the money, but I can tell you at least there was a good reception. We obviously face continued fiscal challenges in our government and the department, and under the Budget Control Act, if the spending levels that it determines come back into place in a year, we will have many challenges in funding the department's priorities, including this one. The Deputy Secretary said that this morning. In terms of how many years it will take several years. It'll take some time. We can't hire 2,400 people for the shipyard in a week to find the skilled tradesmen and train them and get them up to standard. That will take some time. I would hesitate to put a number on it. It's certainly going to be several years, but I don't know whether I could say 5 or 8 or 10. Not tens of years, yeah. No, and part of this is we have plans looking ahead to modernize the triad in the middle of the next decade. And so these investments are a bridge to get us to that period.
Thank you. Tom with Hong Kong Phoenix TV. You mentioned that this is not something that the DoD can't fix, but Secretary Hagel is not the first one to tackle these problems, but these problems still exist. So why these problems are still exist after former secretaries have tried to address this, and why do you think that this time Secretary Hagel will be able to fix this? Thank you.
It's a very fair question. There have been many similar or reviews of this kind in the past. I'll give you the answer that Secretary Work gave this morning, which I think is different, is, first of all, the level of attention that the Secretary and Deputy Secretary are giving to it. I've only been in the Department of Defense for 3 months, and I've probably attended more meetings on this subject than any other. The accountability mechanism the Secretary has established, which is this quarterly reporting to him and more regularly to the Deputy. I can tell you as a longtime government official, when the very top boss says you're coming to a meeting every 3 months and you've got to report on how you're doing, it tends to focus the mind. So our leadership will not be able to hope that this goes away after a year and move on to other business. He is going to be calling them to account. I think added to that, the mechanism that we have set up through our cost assessment and program evaluation unit is we're not just having a matrix of seeing which boxes we're checking, but we're really taking a hard look at seeing if the action we have taken is working and is achieving the desired result. And if it's not, we'll come up with other ways. We got this question yesterday in the Congress. It's a completely fair one. What I will say is we have 2 more years in the President's term, and I think the Secretary intends to serve to the end. And many of the rest of us who are in the Department, the Deputy Secretary, myself, we just got there this year. Unless we perform badly and are asked to leave, we're going to stay till the end. So we will see it through for the next 2 years and then hand this over to the next administration.
Peter Klein, NTV and RTL German television. How does this decay and neglect affect the nuclear arms station in Germany, and should the peoples living around Ramstein or Büchel should be concerned about their safety?
No, it doesn't affect the safety of the weapons or the security of them. What we had was on the security and inspection side, what I will say is past changes that led to some of the things we have in our inspection regime led to a culture of micromanagement, and what both reports say is what had become, the inspection had become the mission, so that instead of having a program in which airmen were accountable or sailors were accountable to their commanders, and the commanders took responsibility for what was happening, everybody was spending a lot of time preparing for the next inspection instead of the mission. So I think it's really a cultural change in the forces that is going to be a significant part of this, as well as the infrastructure. But I repeat, our deterrent is safe, secure, and effective today. And if we make these investments, which we will do, they will remain so.
Hi, I'm Chen Weihua, China Daily. Thank you for doing this. I hope to distract you from, to a more sort of a broad issue, concern to international audience. Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2009 for talking about a nuclear-free world. And Secretary Hagel obviously shared that vision. And but now what we're seeing is, reports said, I don't know if it's true, that the U.S. intends to spend $1 trillion in the next 3 decades to upgrade its nuclear arsenals. Now Russia, obviously, it's another key element is now basically walking away from cooperating with the U.S. on this issue. So all the signs are not good. So are we moving further away from this nuclear-free world vision? And the other thing, I'm from China, so how do you think China fits this equation? Does that, because China only maintains a minimum deterrence capabilities, so it is very much an issue for U.S. and Russia. Is that right? Thank you.
I would say that the President's charge to the government that he wants the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons remains an objective for the United States. He also said in his speech in Prague in 2009 that as long as we maintain nuclear weapons, they shall be safe, secure, and effective. He did a lot in the first term with the New START Treaty in seeking fewer nuclear weapons, and you may recall in a speech in Berlin last year made some announcement about we could pursue through negotiations further reductions. So this remains the goal of the United States. Your reference to investments of trillions of dollars. Our nuclear triad, we built and purchased it. Some of the platforms were built and have been deployed since the 1960s and 1970s. So there will come a point in the next decade where we'll have to buy new platforms, a new bomber, a new missile, new submarines for our sea-based capability. Those are quite expensive, and I won't be in the Defense Department in 2025 or 2026, so I can't tell you what that will look like. But we are making plans for that period now. With regard to the Chinese, I'm not sure I understood your question.
Well, I just thought, is this nuclear-free world is basically a Russia-U.S. issue, or you think China, maybe other U.K.? I mean, the lesser, of a nuclear power is important. I mean, this sort of a nuclear-free world vision. Thank you.
I'm not sure how to answer your question. As you say, the Chinese have nuclear weapons, and if it shares President Obama's vision, then it can work with us toward that goal.
Let's move on.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you, sir, for this presentation, and thank you for FPC for hosting this event. I had a quick question regarding the stockpile in Turkey. According to the independent press reports, there are 60 or 70 nuclear weapons deployed in Incirlik Air Base, and I'm wondering how it will be an impact of this review on the stockpile in Turkey. The number will diminish, or the safety and security will increase, or more the personnel will be deployed for this security and new safe and security measures. So what will be the concrete impact of this review on the stockpile in Turkey? Thank you.
I can't talk about where we maintain nuclear weapons in Europe, so I would just refer you to my prior answers about safety and security.
I think we only have time for one more question, but we only have one hand up, so that makes it easy.
Hi, Chris Kelly, Tokyo newspaper. Was there any concern or any attention paid in the study to concerns about oil development fracking in particular in North Dakota, fairly close to the Minot missile wing.
I am not aware that the reviews looked at that issue. They did look at some other issues unique to Minot. One that comes to mind is that because of the oil economy in North Dakota, the Air Force has trouble competing for workers because the oil companies are paying more than the United States military.
And with that, I think we're going to wrap up for today. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks, sir, for your time.
Thank you very much.